Tonight, Canada fires back at Trump's tariffs.
We must respond with both purpose and force.
Slapping tariffs on some U.S. vehicles.
We are very worried to put food on the table.
Shutdowns, layoffs, a stock market slide, the worst day since the start of the pandemic. Still, Trump is unfazed.
Well, I think it's going to all work out.
The global trade war also hitting the campaign trail. At Issue assesses the impact. 2 Freedom Convoy organizers found guilty of mischief but acquitted on most other charges.
5 out of 6 ain't bad.
And the Shingles vaccine could reduce your risk of dementia.
To think that there's an added benefit, that's pretty amazing.
A landmark study, why it could protect aging brains and who might benefit most.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. The shock waves from Donald Trump's latest tariff moves are reverberating tonight through the stock market, the auto sector, the election campaign, and Canadians' homes. Already thousands of workers in Canada are facing layoffs, and Ottawa is now hitting back. The Prime Minister announcing new 25% tariffs on some vehicles imported from the U.S., a move that matches Trump's approach. All as Mark Carney warns, the U.S. president has fundamentally changed the global economy overnight. Well, Canada dodged one tariff blow, but got hit by another. Now a plan to strike back and mitigate the pain for Canadians is underway. Ashley Burke begins our coverage tonight from Ottawa.
The day after Donald Trump took on the world with a barrage of new tariffs, Canada's Prime Minister warning it will torpedo global economic growth.
The president's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world.
Mark Carney calling Trump's tariffs unjustified, unwarranted, and misguided.
We must respond with both purpose and force.
Canada spared some tariffs, but not all, and is hitting back, slapping 25% tariffs on American vehicles non-compliant with its free trade deal, matching what Trump imposed on Canada's auto sector overnight.
These auto companies aren't making money hand over fist. They're basically trying to get by day by day and keep their people employed. So our goal is to continue negotiating down to a 0%.
The impact already starting to show. Automaker Stellantis temporarily halting production at a plant in Windsor, Ontario. News that hit the campaign trail.
This is a direct attack on these workers. And for the workers that I met at Stellantis, they woke up to an announcement now that their plant has been shut down for 2 weeks. Can I touch it? Yes.
The Conservatives proposing to cut the GST from Canadian-made vehicles, a pledge the NDP made last week. Poilievre also blaming Carney for not stopping Trump.
Mark Carney said he had a, quote, very productive, very constructive call with President Trump, citing progress. Unfortunately, Canada has not been spared. There is no progress.
Carney pushing back, saying unlike other countries, Canada was spared the worst-case scenario.
We have the best deal of a series of tough deals, bad deals in many respects. That is progress.
This is the largest round of tariffs Canada has launched so far, targeting more than $35 billion worth of American vehicles. The government hopes to bring in $8 billion in revenue that it says will go directly to Canadian auto companies and their workers.
So, Ashley, Mark Carney said today that he really doesn't want to give Canadians false hope about how long Trump could keep going with this.
Yeah, Adrian, Mark Carney says that he doesn't think Trump is going to change course until Americans are in so much financial pain it is impossible to ignore. He warned that could be a long and hard road for Canadians and that Trump could put more tariffs on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and lumber. Carney will now head back on the campaign trail to pitch himself as the one to lead Canada out of this trade war.
All right, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. And back on that trail, tonight all 5 federal party leaders were in the hot seat in Montreal, each facing a 3-on-1 grilling from Radio-Canada journalists.
Monsieur Blanchet, bonsoir.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Cinq.
Bonsoir, Madame.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Carney.
Monsieur Penneau, bonsoir. Bienvenue. Monsieur Poilievre, bienvenue à cette grande émission.
It was an opportunity for the campaigns to get their message out in French. The stakes winning over voters in Quebec's 78 ridings in terms of seats, second only to Ontario. Watching it all, Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton. So, Rosie, looming large over these interviews, inevitably, was Donald Trump.
For sure. And the format was really fascinating here, Adrian, because it meant that every leader had to answer some questions, and you could really compare and contrast what their answers were about Donald Trump. But of course, there are really only two leaders here who are going to have to take on Donald Trump if you look at the opinion polls. Mark Carney said that he managed to get some things already from the president. He managed to get a commitment to renegotiate CUSMA in May after the election with whomever the prime minister is at the time. And he also said that he managed to get some respect from the president because he no longer is calling the prime minister governor, and there are no jokes about the 51st state. Pierre Poilievre was asked questions about why he had not focused more on Donald Trump previously, and he said that his job is to make Canada better. He's the only leader who's offering solutions to Canada around affordability and cost of living, while also saying that he would be well suited to take on Donald Trump. Yves-François Blanchet, in a difficult position, obviously, as leader of the Bloc Québécois, but made an interesting case about how he wants Quebecers to give him the ability to be an ally to Canada and to Mexico, and not a bargaining chip in a negotiation when it comes to Quebec culture and language.
So the stakes here clearly high. Quebec is watching, but French isn't Mark Carney's strong suit.
No, it isn't. And he certainly was the weakest performer in French, sometimes stumbling, occasionally letting an English word slip. But he managed to hold his own. He was very careful in his answers. Remember that Quebec's race right now, Adrian, is really coming down to the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. Pierre Poilievre, very fluent in French, didn't have any trouble answering any of the questions. But Yves-François Blanchet, of course, French is his first language, did take a couple of knocks at Mark Carney. Mark Carney had been asked to describe what Quebec meant to him, and he uses the phrase a distinct society, which is kind of a passé phrase for many Quebecers. And Yves-François Blanchet criticized him for doing that, said, hey, we've moved on. We are now a nation of Quebecers, and that has been recognized by Parliament. So you could see him trying to slap down the Liberal leader in hopes of chipping away at some of his support so that he could, in fact, hold on to some of his seats. Quebec, as you know, such a key battleground to whoever is going to win this election.
All right, Rosie, thank you.
Thanks.
Now, thousands of Canadian auto workers are already off the job from tariffs of up to 25% that took effect overnight. And now with Canadian counter tariffs, there is fear on both sides of the border. Eli Glasner shows us the impact.
Fear and frustration outside this Stellantis plant in Windsor, Ontario.
Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months, who knows? We are very worried.
As the auto sector tariffs went into effect, the notice went out. 4,000 people who build Chrysler and Dodge vehicles now on temporary layoff.
You know, this is a world-class automaker in a world-class plant with a highly productive workforce, with 2 new products in a retooled plant in the first term of their product launch. Closing for 2 weeks in April is not normal.
Layoffs also beginning in the U.S. Midwest and Mexico.
I'm not surprised that you're seeing immediate reactions. This is what the U.S. policy will do.
Canada's auto industry says as tariffs stack up, so will vehicle prices.
These tariffs are going to drive up new vehicle prices by between $4,700 US and $10,000 US.
Fears of consumers putting the brakes on new purchases are already having an effect south of the border.
Right now, companies have been in one of 2 modes, analysis and paralysis.
Once beautiful American dream.
On what he called Liberation Day, Trump promised a golden age of American manufacturing. GM has announced increased production in Indiana, but at what price?
Our economies in Michigan and Ontario are absolutely interconnected, and it took years, decades to build that.
To people in Detroit, those tariffs bring risk.
I think they're terrible, they're unfounded, they're inconsistent, they're illogical, there's no logic or plan to it. I think it's awful.
We may see the long-term benefit, but in the interim, I'm just afraid that we'll see a lot of backlash.
Canada needs to make a dramatic shift, says this trade expert, and explore working with the EU and China.
In addition to elbows up, I think it's now digging our heels in for the long term.
Looking for a new way forward on a rocky road. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
The financial markets took a deep dive today following Trump's tariff announcement. But the U.S. president and his allies are standing firm, flooding American cable news, insisting the turmoil is no cause for concern. Katie Simpson now with their message.
There has not been a single day this bad on the markets since COVID hit in 2020. U.S. tariffs rattling investors, sparking dramatic losses. If the U.S. president is worried, he's not showing it, comparing the market sell-off to a sick person in need of surgery.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing.
After firing the most devastating shot yet in his trade war, Donald Trump flew to Florida for a golf gala dinner, telling reporters on board Air Force One his tariffs are part of a power grab.
Every country's called us. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. If we would have asked some of these countries, almost most of these countries, to do us a favor, they would have said, no, now they'll do anything for us.
This appears to contradict what Trump's own team is saying.
The president made it clear yesterday this is not a negotiation, this is a national emergency.
Let's bring in the vice president.
Trump's allies are now trying to sell Americans on their plan, despite warnings tariffs will increase the cost of living.
We know people are struggling. We're fighting as quickly as we can to fix what was left to us, but it's not going to happen immediately.
Finally changing U.S. policy to protect American workers is what Donald Trump is all about. So what you're going to see is factories going to be built here.
American trading partners are also being warned against retaliation.
If you're angry and you fight back to the greatest customer in the world, you're going to lose. We are the sumo wrestler of this world.
On top of the global backlash, there's some outrage at home, too.
Looks a lot more to us like the roof just fell in on American families, who are going to face thousands of dollars more in costs.
What we face now is a gigantic, bleeding, self-inflicted wound that is reverberating across the globe.
America's trading partners, allies, and adversaries alike are getting a taste of what Canada has been dealing with for the past couple of months as they start to weigh their own responses.
And Katie, Donald Trump is signaling at this point that he wants major concessions if a country is going to avoid tariffs.
In his own words, he says he's looking for phenomenal offers, and that's really on par with the bold and vague demands Trump has embraced in his trade war. And he's suggesting more sector-based tariffs could be coming soon for pharmaceuticals and semiconductors.
All right, Katie Simpson in Washington. Let's take a closer look at the markets, which took such a nosedive. These are the three major U.S. indexes, the S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ. And right from the moment markets opened, a vertical line down, the results only getting worse by close. In the end, all three suffered their biggest one-day losses since 2020 in the beginning of the pandemic. Okay, so let's bring in senior business correspondent Peter Armstrong. Peter, boy, these markets are pretty telling, eh?
They are. And look, they're trying to send us a message. And they're telling us Donald Trump's trying to do two things at once. And he's trying to have it both ways. That on the one hand, he's saying this is a vast reordering of 70 years of global trade. But on the other, he's saying, I'm going to try to do this in a way that doesn't really hurt American businesses or American consumers. I spoke with one analyst today who said Trump can't have his cake and eat it too. And that's what markets are saying. Sure, you can upend 70 years of global trade, but that's going to come with a cost. And today was the first day we got a real glimpse of what that cost might be.
A big question that continues to swirl, how realistic is a prospect of a recession?
Certainly got a little bit higher today and yesterday as well. I think the odds, though, depend entirely on what Donald Trump really wants. Investors say this sell-off we saw today was based on the assumption that these tariffs are going to get rolled off again in 3 or 4 or 5 months' time. If Trump is serious about that more fundamental reordering we talked about, this is just a starting point. For both the markets and for the real economy, stocks could fall much further. GDP could slip. We could go all the way into a recession. Inflation would jack back up again. Unemployment would rise. It would hurt. And the question investors have is whether Trump has the stomach to tolerate that pain, if that is, in fact, the plan he wants. And the sad fact of the matter, Adrian, is we simply don't know what it is that he wants.
Okay, buckle up. Peter Armstrong, thank you.
You bet.
Now, one day after the Trump tariffs were released, it's becoming clear what they are and how they were described don't quite match up. The Trump administration has claimed these global tariffs were meticulously planned with fairness in mind.
Every country will be reciprocal. won't affect everybody because there's somewhere we have similar tariffs.
Then, on self-appointed Liberation Day, pomp and circumstance, followed by a confusing prop and math that just didn't add up. What initially appeared to be an incredibly complex formula, later simplified by experts and not based on reciprocity at all. Instead, on trade deficits hitting nearly everyone, more devastating for some than others. Take Lesotho, a small, relatively poor African nation now facing the largest tariff of all, 50%. And then there are the peculiar choices, like the British Indian Ocean Territory. Its main resident, a U.S. airbase, and yet it's being tariffed 10%. More bizarre still, the remote Australian territory of Heard Island, also tariffed 10%. Those tariffs may be hard to collect, though, because its main inhabitants are penguins. In countries that will be hit hard, world leaders are speaking out tonight as they scramble to manage the fallout.
A trade war is in nobody's interest, in my view. But of course, we have to protect ourselves.
The UK has produced a list of counter tariffs it could impose in reaction to the 10% levy on general imports and 25% on cars. For now, the plan is to aim for a trade agreement that mitigates the damage. And Europe is quickly working to hit back on Washington's aggressive 20% tariffs on exports to the U.S. As Briar Stewart shows us, as leaders ready their response, Canada has an ally in the uncertainty.
Technology and innovation is front and center at this large trade fair in Hanover, Germany. But hanging over it all, the talk of tariffs.
We feel like we're losing family.
80% of Brad Sparkman's Canadian business is centered on the auto industry. And with the new U.S. auto tariffs, he's hoping to drum up more business in Europe.
I was scared, to be honest with you. I was very nervous. But it's been absolutely overwhelming to see the response and the reception we're getting as Canadian companies by the European markets.
There are more than 200 Canadian companies at this trade fair, and organizers say in recent weeks they saw a real spike in interest, and that's because of all the political uncertainty around the U.S. tariffs.
The EU is looking to diversify its trading partners too. It's facing a 20% across-the-board tariff and warning of dire consequences.
The costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase.
The EU is still drafting its retaliatory measures, but France's President Emmanuel Macron is already calling for European companies to suspend all planned investment to the U.S. Meanwhile, business experts are trying to assess the impact.
So it's maybe ending in a disaster for the U.S. economy and then also for the world economy. So we don't see any good thing in this direction.
Which is why Europe is looking for more opportunities with Canada. Germany's outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke with Prime Minister Mark Carney on Wednesday, and earlier this week was in Hanover, where he said that Germany stands with Canada, which is sovereign and independent.
And it feels so good for everybody here from Canada to hear the Chancellor say that. They're all talking about elbows up.
In that vein, this robotic goalie was a big draw at the fair. A conversation starter in what business leaders hope will be a deepening trade relationship. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Hanover.
And China, confronted with a tariff of 54%, is vowing retaliation if the U.S. doesn't back down. But others are taking a different tact.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
Australia, facing a 10% levy, says it won't join a race to the bottom by striking back. Japan says it's disappointed by the 24% charge against its products, noting that Japanese investment in the U.S. economy exceeds all other countries. Well, the organizers of the Freedom Convoy have been found not guilty of most of the charges against them.
5 out of 6 ain't bad. I can't comment on the mischief charge.
Details of the judge's ruling next. Plus, how the Shingles vaccine could protect you against dementia.
And to think that there's an added benefit, that's pretty amazing.
The new groundbreaking study. And later, a very lonely book signing becomes a viral moment.
I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
The little girl who made him an overnight bestseller. We're back in 2. At least 6 people are dead after storms like this one tore across parts of the U.S. South and Midwest. The property damage is significant. About 90 million people were at risk of severe weather, and forecasters say worse is on the way. Well, Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Lich and Chris Barber have been convicted of mischief for their role in the 2022 protests that paralyzed downtown Ottawa. But the judge also acquitted them of some other charges. And as David Fraser shows us, supporters of the pair and the protest took the day as a win.
We love you, Chris. Flanked by media, greeted by supporters, Chris Barber and Tamara Lich walked into court to face several charges, including mischief, intimidation, and obstructing police, for their role in leading what became the Freedom Convoy, a protest against the government's COVID-19 mandates that shut down Ottawa's downtown core for weeks in 2022. But the judge only convicted them for mischief, and for Barber, an additional charge of counseling others to disobey a court order.
5 out of 6 ain't bad. I can't comment on the mischief charge or any of the aspects of the judge's decision while the matter is still pending for sentence.
In the 127-page ruling, the judge focused on individual statements made by Lich and Barber during the 2022 protest. There was some spattering of applause and excitement in the room when some of the not guilty decisions were read out. In ruling the two didn't obstruct police, the judge said the evidence showed the two had instructed followers to listen to authorities. When they were arrested, they were polite and cooperated. During her decision, the judge made clear this was not a trial for the Freedom Convoy, but she also said that the crimes they were accused of clearly happened in the context of those protests. The court ruling that in the end, Lich and Barber crossed a line, but not as far as Crown prosecutors said they did. The Crown, however, says they will seek jail time. David Fraser, CBC News, Ottawa.
A new study finds getting a shingles vaccine could significantly reduce your risk of dementia.
It would have huge implications for dementia care.
How researchers believe the vaccine may protect against the disease. And after the break, Rosie's here with that issue. Hello.
Hey, Adrian. Tonight, we're obviously going to talk about Trump's tariffs and how the government is responding.
So while it's progress that further tariffs were not imposed on Canada yesterday, the president's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world.
So what will the trade war mean for Canada and our role in the global economy? How is this affecting the election campaign? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
There is new research tonight that shows getting the shingles vaccine could lower your risk of dementia significantly. Christine Birak breaks down the findings.
It's a vaccine for shingles. Now scientists say there's more evidence it can lower the risk of developing dementia by as much as 20%.
It would have huge implications for dementia care and also for research into dementia and the causes of dementia.
A new study published in the journal Nature looked at over 200,000 older adults in Wales for 7 years. In 2013, a shingles vaccine was offered to those who were age 79 but not 80. This unique rollout gave scientists a chance to go back and compare two nearly identical groups, one vaccinated, one not.
This is a landmark study.
Researchers found the vaccine reduced the probability of a new dementia diagnosis by approximately 1/5, with the strongest effect in women.
If you consider over the past decades we've had nothing that affects dementia or prevents it, a 20% reduction is a major step in the right direction.
Researchers aren't sure why the shingles vaccine may be protective. They do know shingles is a painful rash caused by reactivation of the chickenpox virus in a person's system. One theory is
just by preventing shingles, it prevents this inflammatory event that might contribute to inflammation in the brain and the development of diseases like dementia.
And to think that there's an added benefit, that's pretty amazing.
67-year-old Kathy Howell got her shot. She's also exercising and playing games to keep her brain as healthy as possible.
It's just good to be always engaged in trying to learn new things.
The shingles shot used in this latest study is an older vaccine, but other studies show the current vaccine offers even better protection against shingles. Researchers say it may also better protect your brain. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, Rosie's here with that issue to break down another remarkable week in politics in the shadow of a trade war.
At issue tonight, Trump's global tariffs. Canada was spared a universal tariff, but it is still getting hit, and some sectors are reeling.
Effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles.
While it's progress that further tariffs were not imposed on Canada yesterday, the President's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world.
So how will Trump's tariffs affect Canada? We're already seeing some of it. And what should we make of the government response during this election campaign? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Incredibly, we also have not spoken since the Prime Minister and the President spoke on the phone. So there's a lot to cover here, including the fact that we did not get a universal global tariff, but we did still get hit with the automobile sector, steel and aluminum remains, and then the other quote-unquote fentanyl tariffs that resulted from the first time round, including 10% on energy. Chantal, what do you make of where Canada ended up after yesterday?
I tend to agree with Mark Carney's assessment in the least bad place of bad places. But we live in the world, for one, so we are not immune to everything that will be happening as a result of this. And second, there are people tonight who don't know when they're going to go back to work in Canada, who work in the auto sector. It's not the only sector that's going to be hit. So it's not as if some planet fell on Earth and we were spared. That didn't happen. And to say good things about the four leaders who are the main leaders campaigning in this campaign, none of them tried really hard to pretend nothing happened.
Yeah, that's true. And some of them put out different ideas, and we'll talk about that more in order to respond. But what did you make of what Trump did, Andrew, and sort of what that says, if you can interpret that, about how he wants to approach this country?
Well, he blew up the world trading system, is what he's done, much as he previously has more or less wrecked NATO. He's kind of going through the world institutions by which the democracies have governed themselves over the last 80 years and blowing them up one by one. This was worse than anybody even had predicted, which is Trump's modus operandi is always to exceed expectations. And you saw the reaction in the markets today. I hate to be even slightly cynical, but it's a bit of a good moment for probably any sitting prime minister. But Carney is certainly, every time he stands up in front of those Canadian flags and puts on the face of doom and announces, everything that we've known about the world is over, I figure he goes up 2 points in the polls. Because he looks, he's not at that moment, apparently, he is, but he's not apparently campaigning for office. He's not even conducting a trade war. At that moment, he is explaining to people what just happened. Mm-hmm. And that's a very powerful position to be in. He's doing a good job of it. I think he's probably helping people to understand the significance of what was going on here. Yeah. But you can't deny it's also, I think, to his benefit politically.
For sure, for sure. Both things are definitely true in this instance. Althea, your thoughts?
I think it's really hard to uncouple the politics, from the Prime Minister hat from the Liberal leader hat. And in fact, I don't actually think the Liberal Party is trying to separate the two, because the Prime Minister in his speeches is using the same language that he is using on the campaign trail. That being said, it is the perfect scenario for Mark Carney, because people are worried about the chaos, and here is somebody with a resume, although the Conservatives will remind us that a resume is not a plan, but he is somebody that has a unique set of qualification that seem to be in need at the moment. And so people who were very angry and anxious about their economic situation 4 months ago are now scared, and Mark Carney seems to present this aura of calm. I know what's happening and I know how to fix it. And I think that's why we've seen the polls in such like a crazy red wave across this country, and you talk to Liberal candidates, and the response at the doors is like anything they've ever seen, including in 2015. That being said, what the president has done is utterly chaotic, and we are going to feel the pain. Maybe most of us don't feel it immediately, but we will feel it. And so for some political leaders to kind of cast this in a positive light, I think also doesn't ring very sympathetic, very Team Canada at the moment. I think people want to know that we are all in this together, and that even though you may not be immediately affected, don't think that you couldn't be, right? And so I do think that across the country and across party lines, I think that we need to remember that.
That you're referring, of course, to Premier Daniel Smith calling this a victory for Canada. I think that the fallout will hit, to your point, all Canadians at some point. Right now, it'll hurt most acutely those sectors that are tariff. But if the world is headed towards this sort of upheaval, there'll be a knock-on effect for Canada. Chantal?
So I did note that in the Prime Minister's suit, it was quite a lengthy speech that Mark Carney delivered. He did not go into partisan attacks, did not say Pierre Poilievre's name, so kind of stuck to what is an advantageous position. There is no way that it would be great for him to bring himself back to the Liberal leader on the campaign trail, except to remind people, and he did, that he still needs to be elected on April 28 to follow through. I also noted that he didn't tell people everything is going to be okay.
No, he didn't.
Which I think is what Canadians need to hear, and they also heard it from other leaders.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it is an advantage to the Liberals that this entire issue. And I'm not sure what the alternative is. I heard criticism, Mark Carney becoming, donning the suit of Prime Minister. The alternative is, should we have no one in charge at this particular juncture? And yes, except for Daniel Smith, we will all feel the hit, because when an industry like the auto industry takes a hit, everybody feels the pain. That being said, the fact that the auto industry is square in the center of this, I think I said that before, works for the Liberals in the sense that Ontario is where the election will be decided.
Yeah. I did hear from Conservatives today, Andrew, who were very upset that they felt, Mark Carney was campaigning in his prime ministerial role, but that is sort of, what they're having to deal with. I've never seen a campaign, I don't think, where the prime minister in caretaker mode has to be doing things, because you can't just not allow these things to happen. But it is undoubtedly very frustrating for them.
Well, yeah, but he's not announcing, spending programs that, have not gotten through Parliament or anything like that. So I don't know how you can say he should not respond to a historical event like this.
Yeah.
I do think that there was, the most interesting part of the speech to me was, just as on the defense side of things, people are starting to talk about, do we need to put together defense arrangements that don't include the United States? Talking about putting together a trade arrangement, a free trade arrangement with countries that still believe in free trade, that may or that will not include the United States, and announcing, now this may have just been campaign bump, I don't know, but announcing that Canada was going to take some kind of leadership role in that. I'd like to hear more about that and see whether it's just a bluff or if there's if he has some concrete idea in mind.
Yeah. Last word to you, Althea.
I think what's interesting is that we're also hearing now from opposition leaders that they want to participate in this Team Canada approach, and they're kind of in a way lending credibility to Mark Carney as Prime Minister by doing that. And we're hearing that language from the Bloc Québécois, like talking about a Buy Canadian plan, which I didn't think the Sovereigntist Party would suggest. The other thing that I think is really interesting to note is just how different Mark Carney's tact is to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who was very combative at the end of his tenure, and he had clearly nothing to lose, but Mr. Carney is taking a much more cautious approach, and it almost feels like they themselves are kind of walking on eggshells because they're not sure what the president might tweet on any given day. And yes, the call went well, but who knows what next week has in store. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I don't know if it tells us that much about the man or if it just tells us about the man in the campaign.
Okay, we're going to leave this part there. When we come back, we'll look at how the tariffs are changing the election campaign yet again. That's next. At issue, tariff response, what the other party leaders are putting on the table to respond to Donald Trump's tariffs.
A new conservative government will make it a priority to keep industry moving and workers working.
New Democrats will bring in a victory bond, like we did in the World War.
So it could have been worse, but the best part of this all is that we still have 25 days during which we will be able to have a normal campaign.
So are the other parties offering any compelling response to Trump, any policies that could punch through here? Let's bring back Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Maybe I'll start with you, Andrew. I did think Pierre Poilievre said the most on this issue. I think that he has said to date that he will get on the phone, he'll talk to the president, he'll get him somehow to suspend tariffs, they'll renegotiate CUSMA, and he had some other ideas. But today he did seem to be talking more about it, perhaps because he knew he had to the day after this happened.
I would say in the last 2 or 3 days, I think you've seen the pivot. The language today was almost entirely Trump-directed. It was a little bit combative, but also it was quite constructive. Some of the policy proposals he's been bringing forward, there was a very interesting capital gains proposal where if you reinvested in Canadian companies or Canadian assets, then you can defer the taxation on it. That's not the game changer the Conservatives were talking about, but it's creative policy. And today, talking about a GST break on automobiles, which was clearly, aimed at the concerns about the, prices of cars going up with all the tariffs being sprayed around in various directions. But it was all framed as a response to the crisis, and I think that's responsible. I think that's probably in his best interest. The only trouble he's facing is getting attention. Partly because the Prime Minister in any situation like this will naturally get more attention, partly because there's stuff going on around him that he can't really control that's really not helping his campaign at the moment. But him personally, I would say, has had a good couple of days on the campaign.
I will say the GST car thing was an NDP idea from a week ago. I'm not saying he borrowed it, but there is another policy exactly the same from the NDP. Chantal?
A lot of Conservatives actually liked the past 2-3 days. They felt it was more on point, but most of them add this, if only he'd done this a bit sooner.
Yeah.
As in, during the leadership campaign, there was nothing preventing Mr. Poilievre from framing himself as that person by going on doing what Premier Ford was doing, going on shows in the U.S. To defend the Canadian interest. I'm also curious, because he has been a lot more aggressive in his language about Donald Trump and tariffs. I'm curious as to how the significant section of his base reacts to this, given that there are significant numbers of Conservative voters who actually like Donald Trump and like the 51st state idea. So it seems he finally decided to cut them loose because he's going to lose the election if he doesn't do otherwise. But I'm wondering if it's too little, too late.
Well, I also wonder if you cut those people loose, do you lose enough support there that you end up losing the election anyway? Because to your point, Chantal, that he hasn't moved to the middle quickly enough, and those people are also then lost to him. But Althea, you give me your thoughts. You have lots of smart thoughts on his base.
I don't think he's giving up part of his base. I think he's trying to forge this middle ground where he's giving enough to the people that want to hear a very tough on Trump message while also keeping his own base that's staunchly with him mobilized and energized and talking about a whole bunch of stuff that is of interest to them. What I smiled when you talked about the GST off cars, because like the dirty little secret in this election campaign is that so much of the policy offerings that all the party leaders are putting forward are borrowing heavily from each other. The plan to address Trump, whether you're listening to Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre, is basically the same plan. We're going to do targeted tariffs. We're going to try to protect Canadian consumers as much as we can. We're going to use the money from the auto tariffs to give that back to the auto workers. We're going to get rid of internal trade barriers. We're going to invest more in energy development and it's basically all the same thing. Even the housing plans are very similar. The part of the problem for the opposition, though, and I'll say this about the Conservatives have the most, like, the beefiest policy offering. They have spent a lot of time, a lot of energy giving lots to chew on. And some of it is, you know, you mentioned capital gains. That's actually an old, like, Stephen Harper promise. But they've repackaged them and they make them resonate with a certain group of people, except that nobody is listening because most people are just scared of Trump, and that's what they have front of center, and I don't think policy is really going to matter that much in this election.
Chantal,
but they are rightly scared, and they, you know, we talked about the ballot box issue question being about who can best handle Trump, but it has become refined over the past few days, and both Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney are saying that the day after the election they want to get down to renegotiating the relationship with the United States. So we've now narrowed down the same ballot box question. Which of the two do you want to negotiate with Donald Trump this new trade arrangement? And it ain't going to be easy. But the problem is that when Mark Carney says that, he gets NDP and Bloc votes. When Pierre Poilievre says that, he doesn't. And that's the basic equation of this two-headed election.
Andrew,
I think there are some differences in policy, in terms of, particularly in terms of the reconstruction, if you will, out of this. The stuff you're hearing out of Carney is much more state-directed, much more sort of industrial policy. Poilievre, it seems to me, is much more low taxes, free market approach. Not huge differences, but enough. Do policy win elections? Not necessarily, but they do give you clues to the leaders. They are indications of what their bottom lines are. They give you some sense of the people. But I think his last hope is going to be the debates. That's going to be the chance in a election that's more than usually focused on the leaders and the leaders' qualities as individual human beings. That's going to be, I think, his last chance to really kind of reintroduce himself and see whether he can get things going for him again.
That's hard. I mean, that's in another, not next week, but the week after. Then we're getting into sort of the
advanced
end
polls.
Yeah, the end game. That is hard if that's where they think they're going to turn it around. 20 seconds to you, Althea.
I think what's most interesting to me is that the question is now turning on leadership. And Chantal mentioned the Bloc and the NDP. You know, Pierre Poilievre has been so mean to both of these parties, so it's not a surprise when it wouldn't want to turn around and help him or support him. But it's also how the Conservatives banked on a leader that had such high negatives. Why, you know, we're not seeing team around Pierre Poilievre. We're just seeing Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, got to leave it there. Lots to talk about, and there will be again next week. We're going to continue this conversation after, not on the National, later, about how parties are addressing controversial candidates. You can catch that on YouTube, the At Issue podcast, and with that, I'll send things back to Adrian in Toronto.
Thank you, Rosie. Coming out from a lonely book signing to a bestseller.
Book sales have skyrocketed, and I was in tears. It was overwhelming.
How a mom and daughter duo took one author to the top. That's next in our moment. Last weekend, Canadian author Jonathan Stanley was signing books at his local Barnes & Noble, but he wasn't selling many books. So all that changed when a mother-daughter duo noticed the lonely author and posted a video to TikTok. The ensuing flood of encouragement makes our moment.
Overnight, I became an immediate Amazon bestseller, and I was in tears. It was overwhelming. Last Saturday, I was doing a book signing at Barnes & Noble, and a mom of this little girl, Ella, bravely walked up to me and said, "I want to be an author when I grow up." Her mom said, "We'd love to buy a book." I wrote to Ella, "The greatest gift you have to offer is you." And it was just this really special, uplifting moment. Little did I know, she shot a TikTok video, and she was feeling bad for me simply because there was no one stopping by. All of a sudden, I've got 10 million likes of that first video. There was an incredible outpouring of love and support and kindness and encouragement. When I made a choice to write that book, I just wanted to reach one person, just one, and make a positive difference in their lives. Yesterday, it was the #9 best-selling nonfiction book of all Amazon books. You have changed my life. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Bye. Thanks for all the kind words, everybody.
Amazing. An American family, a Canadian author. What's the book about? It's about bringing humanity back to the workplace. Good for you, Jonathan. And he says he really hopes Ella will be an author one day, and he posted that he will be the first person in line to buy her book. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.